Good morning. This is Mike Smullen, Director of Alumni Relations at New Jersey Institute of Technology. I'm very pleased to welcome you to our latest Highlander Chat on managing supply chain disruption. So now it's my pleasure to introduce Oya Tukel, Dr. Oya Tukel, who is the Dean of the Martin Tuchman School of Management at NJIT. Dr. Tukel, thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you so much, Mike. Thank you for giving us an opportunity to discuss one of the new topics that's very relevant to the audience today. And it's my pleasure to introduce Mr. Steve Rubin, who is going to be our guest. Steve currently serves as the Martin Tuchman School of Management Advisory Board. He is a very accomplished logistics executive with almost 3 decades of leadership in the container shipping and intermodal industries. In parentheses, some of this is my research area, so I'm very interested to hear what he is going to be talking about. He served many years as Chief Executive Officer of nation's largest intermodal terminal and depot services. He was a CEO at the largest domestic ocean carrier and CEO of the largest intermodal leasing company. He led successful sales of 2 companies, yielding excellent returns for shareholders. He is an experienced leader in corporate transformation and restructuring. He has appeared regularly as moderator or expert panelist in many of the leading industry conferences. He was recently a guest speaker for my class. My students enjoyed his presentation immensely. We're very happy to have you, Steve, here, our guest, and looking forward to today's discussion.
Thank you, Dean Tukel.
So, Steve, one of the first questions that Oya and I had both discussed when we were looking to invite you to the Highlander Chat was that clearly in this current time, as the country continues to deal with the effects of the COVID crisis, we're all learning a little bit more about exactly how reliant we are on supply chain. I don't know about you, but every time I order something off of Walmart or Amazon now, I think to myself, man, how long is it going to take me to get from one place to another place to another place? And is it even in this country when I make the order? So I've got to imagine that there's just so much advanced planning that goes into it. And you've got decades of experience at some of the largest shipping containers in the world. How do you plan for disruptions to supply chain when we're in such a global state of affairs?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. First, I'd like to thank Dean Tukel for that great introduction. And I'm really just pleased to be here to engage in the discussion topic. So when we think about supply chain, there are 2 parts. There's the production of the goods, and then there's the logistics of moving the goods from source of origin to ultimately place of destination where they're purchased. So my background is as a logistics professional, and in my line of work, I needed to think about how do I prevent disruptions from goods flowing from production to consumption. So I'll talk a lot about that, but I'll also talk about the production side as well, since that one is really at the heart of our current supply chain challenges in this COVID-19 pandemic situation. First off, no matter how well thought out and executed a supply chain disruption contingency plan is, it's very unlikely that there will be no disruption. That's a double negative. So meaning no matter how well you plan, you're going to have to plan for some problem. And this might be obvious, but there is a direct correlation between the severity of the event and the level of the disruption. The second thing to mention is that the supply chain as we know it today, and Mike, you mentioned, the Walmart and other big box retailers, but these supply chains have been pulled very, very tight in the last 10 years to become extremely efficient. And corporate America has used well-known management techniques such as lean manufacturing and just-in-time, and those are some that Dean Tukel has actually introduced in her class and that I've participated in. so that there's much less excess product in the supply chain pipeline than ever before. So any disruptive event is going to have a more noticeable impact on consumer product availability than might have been 10 years ago. But the first order of planning for a supply chain disruption would be you have to decide what you're planning for. Are you planning for a weather disruption, strikes, fuel price spike or shortage, or some other type of event? And a professional and a business could spend, or I could actually spend my whole interview just talking about the range of disruptions, but a business has to actually be thinking about probabilities based on history. What is probably going to happen, of a disruptive event like weather over the next year or two. Then you think about possible events. And then, of course, there's the black swan, such as a global pandemic. But, because, and I've had to run businesses before, you can't spend all your time planning. You can't spend all your time in the boardroom thinking about what might happen. You really need to be thinking about what is the most likely scenario of a disruptive event. So one, you have to focus on what's most likely and then really plan for those events. And by and large, these large public companies do a pretty decent job of it, but some don't. And smaller companies usually don't have the resources or the time to adequately plan. And some plans can be executed on a dime, such as rerouting a ship from, let's say, Los Angeles to Seattle. But some supply chain disruption plans need months, if not years, of advanced execution, such as a company like Walmart creating distribution centers in ports other than, let's say, Los Angeles and New York, but putting them in Houston or Savannah, Georgia, what used to be considered alternative ports, to ensure there's supply chain fluidity in the case of weather disruption events. Now, the challenge of planning for supply chain disruption has really heightened with the rise of globalization. That's another concept that Dean Tukel had spoke about in her class. The potential disruptive factors have really increased. There are more steps in the supply chain to attend to and plan for than there have ever been. But that being said, there's also an opportunity to use globalization to actually, spread out the risk of enabling production and logistics across the globe versus being dependent on one or two factors, let's say in the United States. That being said, the impact that this pandemic has on rethinking a global supply chain is important consideration. And in fact, was just highlighted in the New York Times literally today. And that's going to be an important factor in future disruption and sustainably planning. One last point is really about today. And for those of us who have gone grocery shopping and seen the shelves perpetually empty of paper products and restrictions on meat and eggs, in my estimation, many of these shortages we're experiencing during these times, they're not technically supply chain disruptions or supply chain driven. They're really supply shortages caused by demand shocks. I mean, when the demand for face masks or disinfectant wipes increases like by 300 times or so, there's going to be shortages. So I would look at what's happening in reality today. For the most part, it's not really the supply chain breaking, it's the demand supply balance breaking.
So it sounds like there's a lot of resiliency that's more recently been built into this. Just out of curiosity, when did you start to see that tightening up the way that you mentioned it? We're talking a year or two ago, or the last decade or so.
It's been 10 years, or at least since the last global economic Great Recession. The business forces of driving efficiency throughout all companies' operations, including the supply chain, really became heightened as companies did everything they could to recover profitability lost during the 2007, 2008 Great Recession. And nothing begets success like success. And when some companies were really successful in creating profitability through efficiency of their supply chain, others took notice. Wall Street took notice, and I would say every company that I know of, that I've done business throughout my own experience within the intermodal and container shipping industries, and our supply base retail customers have really done a tremendous job tightening up the supply chain and making it a lot more efficient. And that really, really means taking waste or excess product out of the supply chain. So there's just not the accessibility of product sitting around on company shelves or even in warehouses and distribution centers like there used to be.
I've got to say, I think that's it's great to hear that, because it means that if we are looking at more of a system shock as opposed to real long-term supply chain disruptions,
Mhm.
if there is such a great understanding of where everything is and we're looking to expand that beyond any one place, it sounds like we're actually in better shape than we might have been otherwise. So I'm kind of encouraged to hear that, frankly.
Yeah.
So, Steve, when you and I were talking with Dean Tukel when we first came up with the concept for this Highlander chat, one of the things that I noticed was you're a graduate of some of the most distinguished economic schools in the country: Leonard and Stern School of Business at NYU, the Wharton School at Penn. And you have this really tremendous experience behind you. But your very first job, or one of the first that you had, was as an auditor at KPMG, and for a while you had a CPA license. When I looked at that, I said, I wonder how these two things come together, or if they come together, because it seems at first glance like such a major career shift. I'm wondering if you can tell me a little bit about, what led you to one place and then to another, or was this a natural path for you?
Yeah, thanks for asking. I'll say it certainly wasn't planned that way in terms of how I started coming out of business school, excuse me for my scratchy throat, and then making my way, through the accounting world and then into the logistics world. Coming out of school, actually in 1987, 88, my dreams of going to Wall Street, because I was a business school undergraduate major and a history major. Actually, they were crushed by the market crash. But I did have a general plan and vision in that I saw business becoming more global. Japan was a rising economic power in the late 80s. And so I took really what the market would bear at the time, which is I was able to actually take a year off, go to Japan, learn Japanese. I taught English, but I had in my back pocket an acceptance for an MBA program at New York University Stern School that was affiliated with KPMG, one of the large Big Eight accounting firms at the time. So I started off a path that I really never thought about on the accounting side. And I did that for a couple of years. I got certified. It was highly encouraged. Became an auditor, but I was nobody's idea of really a skilled accountant or an auditor. But I had a desire for international business or to participate, and I really wanted to, go back to Japan and really leverage what I had learned as far as language and culture. And it just so happened that a job opportunity opened up in the shipping space, of which I knew nothing about, but it was a Japanese company. And there was some talk of them sending me to Japan. And I thought, okay, well, I'll join this company, move to Japan, and eventually slide over to a Japanese financial institution. And then I'll be back on my larger vision. But I ended up after 6 months really loving the logistics business. I found the whole idea of solving supply chain problems and making the business of transportation more efficient really interesting. And the rest is history. I actually never moved back to Japan. I ended up staying with that shipping company for 18 years. That eventually, enabled me to take a step up to chief executive roles in mid-market capitalized companies in the shipping industry and the logistics industry, and here I am today. And I'd say the accounting knowledge that I learned early in my career, that was more of a requirement based on what the market bared back then. That accounting knowledge was extremely beneficial for my career development. think it's beneficial for the business world, and especially the higher you go up in any organization. And the higher you go, actually, the bigger advantage to have some familiarity with the accounting. It really is, because it helps you understand the profit and loss statement. It helps you understand the balance sheet. It helps you understand the concepts of debt and capital structure, and certainly the concept of cash flow. And particularly in today's situation, with the pandemic crushing businesses, the ability for executives to manage cash flow and preserve cash has never been more important. So it's really served me very well in my career as CEO and also my board roles.
So, Steve, you mentioned your career stretching back to the 1980s, and I remember these times pretty vividly. There was Black Monday, right? You had this huge market crash happening in the
Yeah.
1980s. And it seems like almost every decade to 15 years, we've got these ups and downs. So we had the dot com era, the boom and the bust. We
Mhm.
had the early 2000s, obviously, after 9/11. We had the financial crisis. We've got this going on. So it does seem like we've got sort of a statement of comparison, at least in terms of lessons learned from
Mhm.
shipping, intermodal, supply chain, and so on. I- how do you think we're stacking up right now? I mean, you've got such a great basis of comparison. Do you think we're effectively responding to the extent that we can, or do you think we've got a lot more to learn, even over the past couple decades of comparisons you could make?
So another really good question. By and large, I think the logistics part of the supply chain equation is doing incredibly well given all the challenges, particularly around the the social distancing requirements. When it's really it doesn't necessarily lend itself very well, for the logistics part of the supply chain. But our industry is battle tested. As you said, Michael, we've gone through some pretty significant recessions. We've gone through other natural disasters, such as climate events, um, Hurricane Harvey in Houston in 2017, and Hurricanes Irma and Maria in 2017 were devastating for the Gulf region and for the South Atlantic region, respectively. The logistics industry, the ports, the railroads, the trucking companies, the distribution centers, and the ultimate retailers that flow the product through the distribution channel, they learned from um, um, these situations, these crises. There was a very significant man-made crisis back in 2002. There was a port strike that completely shut down the West Coast for 10 days, which was incredibly disruptive. And those of us in the intermodal and shipping industries and the retail industries learned tremendous amounts in the post-mortem afterward of how do we make these supply chains more resilient. And that's why I made the comment earlier that I feel that the supply chain itself is holding up incredibly well. It's the production part that we're starting to be challenged because of the demand pull forward, or now in some cases we're starting to see there truly are some supply shortages being driven by personnel shortages created by the COVID-19 disease. We've all read recently and heard in the business news that Smithfield and Tyson Foods, two of the biggest protein or meat protein producers in the country, have had to shut some of their largest plants because of widespread COVID disease in their plants. That will create a production shortage that will be challenging through the supply chain in the next couple of weeks, leading to meat shortages on the shelves. But that's not a supply chain issue. That really is a production disruption caused by this pandemic. And that's something that's, as I said in the outset, it's almost really impossible to adequately plan for.
I appreciate that. I did see the Smithfield disruption, and
Mhm.
joking to the side, my first thought was, oh man, even if we don't see this today, we're looking at a week, 2 weeks to figure out how this is going to impact us. But I already started seeing some concerns expressed from family, from friends about what's going on in the supermarkets right now. Uh,
Yeah.
so, fingers crossed some of these things end or resolve as quickly as possible. Steve, that brings me to another thought, though. So you're
Mhm.
not a graduate of NJIT, but you do serve on our Martin Tuchman School Management Board of Visitors. Dean Tukel
Yes.
is the dean of that college. Um, you've also been a volunteer at a variety of other organizations. So
Mhm.
if I remember correctly, you were chairman of the Intermodal Association of North America
That's right.
(IANA). You were on the board of directors of the International Institute of Container
Mhm.
Lessors, executive committee of the Ocean Carrier Equipment Management Industry Association. So you've had a lot of involvement in volunteer organizations. What drew you to the Tuckman School Board of Visitors, and how do you see MTSM's mission in supporting the future of intermodal, of shipping, and of in business and management in general?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I love education. I love both learning and I love teaching. And what drew me to the Martin Tuchman School of Management within NJIT is its interdisciplinary focus to fuse management, business, and technology. And back in my college days, I had a front row view to see the incredible success achieved by those at my college who had a business and engineering interdisciplinary course of study. And that was 30 years ago before the internet was even invented. I would say now technology is more critical to business success than ever before. And the stock market certainly recognizes it and rewards it. I mean, I think most of us who are watching this webcast, they know who the FANG stocks are: Facebook, Apple, Amazon, Netflix, Google, all tech companies, all driving the stock market until COVID to new highs. On the other hand, look where Ford Motor Company stock is, the venerable, old line company. It's at $5. And even old school companies like railroads that I've been involved with in the last 30 years, they're investing billions of dollars in technology. And at MTSM, it's their mission to provide that interdisciplinary education of technology and business. And it's arguably the most important approach to higher education today. The who I consider the greatest living American biographer and chronicler of innovation today, and a true Renaissance man. His name is Walter Isaacson. He wrote the definitive Steve Jobs biography, as well as biographies of Benjamin Franklin, Albert Einstein, and most recently Leonardo da Vinci. He recently wrote in the Wall Street Journal that we're on the cusp of a transition from the digital and information age, being of the late 20th century, being the defining, driving business and social force that we have today, to the emergence of a new force, the emergence of biotechnology as the next great field of discovery, of business opportunity, and of social welfare. And at NJIT and the Tuchman School of Management really sit in a perfect place to be an academic leader in both the current and the future scientific and business eras. And that's really what drew me to connect, with the institution. And I'm proud to serve as an advisory board member, and I really look forward to engaging with the other members and Dean Tukel on developing that platform and that vision for what Walter Isaacson mentioned.
All right, Steve, thanks very much. So I want to take a moment at the conclusion here to thank you for taking the time to speak with us this morning.
Sure.
I want to offer my best wishes to you and your family for a safe and healthy spring into summer at this point.
Thank you.
Thinking about you, and really thanks so much for taking time out of what I'm sure is a busy schedule to talk to us today. And my best as well to you, Dean Tukel. Thanks so much for
Thank you.
arrangements here. So it's a real pleasure to have you both on. And yeah, I look forward to welcoming you back in the near future.
Yeah, thank you to both. I really enjoyed it. Best of
Great.
luck and stay safe, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So that was our latest Highlander chat with Steve Rubin, a member of the Martin Tuchman School of Management Board of Visitors. a supply chain and logistics executive with a very long history of dealing with situations like we find ourselves in right now. So, again, my name is Mike Small. I'm Executive Director of the Alumni Relations Office. I invite you to leave messages on social media or on YouTube or Facebook, wherever you happen to see this video. We would be happy to forward those on to Mr. Rubin and ask for his response. Finally, Highlander Chats are now also a podcast, so please do search for us on Apple Podcasts, Google, Spotify, or any other podcast app that you happen to use. Thanks very much, and I send my best wishes to you and your families for a safe and healthy spring. And I look forward to welcoming you to our next Highlander Chat